It all started with a message, a simple notification on a phone that would change the course of Prince Harry's life forever. At first, he thought it was another routine update, another minor royal matter, another report about the media or public events. But the words on that screen made him freeze. His hand trembled, his chest tightened, and a chill ran down his spine. This was no ordinary message. This was a revelation that would shake the foundations of the royal family, a secret that had been buried for decades, finally surfacing in the most devastating way imaginable. The truth about his son, Archie Harrison, was about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to discover that everything you believed about your family was a lie? Imagine the person you trusted most, the man who raised you, the father figure you thought was guiding your life, suddenly revealed to be someone entirely different. That is exactly the storm Prince Harry found himself facing. And the shock was not only personal. It threatened to unravel centuries of tradition, reputation, and power within one of the world's most scrutinized families. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story begins in quiet desperation, late one night. Harry was alone, the weight of recent events pressing heavily on his shoulders. The news about Archie's parentage had arrived quietly at first, in private channels, whispered among a few close aides. It was supposed to be confidential, meant for family eyes only. Yet, the impact was immediate. Harry sank into the armchair in the private quarters of his home, his mind racing. Questions he had never dared to ask filled his thoughts. Could this be true? How could someone betray not just him, but the very essence of his family? And most painfully, what did this mean for his son, the little boy whose face held more innocence than anyone deserved to disrupt? The revelation came in the form of DNA confirmation. No ambiguity, no room for doubt. The results were clear, undeniable. Archie Harrison's biological father was not who the world had believed for years. And the man at the center of this storm? Prince Andrew. Yes, the very same Prince Andrew whose life had already been marred by scandal, controversy, and whispers of indiscretions that seemed almost mythical in their infamy. But this was different. This was not just another headline. This was a truth that cut to the core of family, loyalty, and identity. Imagine the scene. Harry alone in his study, a mix of disbelief and sorrow etched across his face. The room was silent, save for the distant hum of the city outside. He had always prided himself on resilience, on keeping composure under pressure. He had faced criticism, public attacks, and the unrelenting scrutiny of the global press. But this, the revelation that the man who had been a brother-in-law, a family figure, and a supposed ally was in fact the biological father of his son. This struck at a place even public life could not prepare him for. And yet, as the initial shock settled, another realization came crashing in. If this truth were to escape into the public domain, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the monarchy itself. The media would descend like vultures, governments and institutions would whisper, and public opinion, already fragile, could tip into outright scandal. The story wasn't just about betrayal within a family. It was about legacy, power, and the intricate web of control that had been meticulously maintained for centuries. And Harry knew that once this secret was exposed, there would be no turning back. But even amid the chaos of his thoughts, Harry's mind returned, inevitably, to Archie, the little boy who represented hope, innocence, and the next generation of the family. How would he reconcile the truth about his father? Could he ever trust the people around him in the same way again? And what of Meghan, who had already endured scrutiny, pressure, and criticism beyond what most could imagine? Together, they faced not just a personal crisis, but one that threatened to define the public perception of their family forever. While the weight of these revelations pressed on Harry, the palace, miles away, was already moving. Advisors whispered in corridors, private meetings were convened, and crisis strategies were drafted. But these efforts were not aimed at comforting Harry. They were aimed at containing the fallout. The monarchy, a centuries-old institution built on tradition, image, and control, had never faced a scandal quite like this. DNA evidence did not lie. Facts could not be spun or softened. The truth was absolute, and that absolute truth had the power to shatter lives. At this point, you might be asking yourself, how did it come to this? How did a story that seemed so clear, so straightforward for generations, twist into something so unimaginable? To understand the magnitude of this revelation, you need to step back and look at the players, the history, and the undercurrents of tension that had been simmering for decades. Prince Andrew, already known for past controversies, had always lived in a shadow of public scrutiny. But secrets, even those carefully hidden, have a way of emerging at the worst possible moment. And for Harry and Meghan, the timing could not have been worse. What makes this story truly compelling is not just the shock of the revelation itself, but the human element, the raw emotions, the private struggles, the moral dilemmas, and the impossible choices. Harry, who has been through immense personal trials, faced a test unlike any other. Betrayal, grief, anger, and helplessness all collided in that moment. He was a father, a husband, a prince, and a man grappling with a truth he never wanted to confront. Each thought spiraled into another. How do you protect your child when the very foundations of trust are eroded? How do you maintain dignity when your family, the institution you grew up in, is implicated in deception? And then there was the curiosity gap, the question that would haunt Harry and eventually captivate the world. How did this secret remain hidden for so long? What mechanisms of control, silence, and suppression were used to maintain appearances? And more importantly, who else knew the truth, and why did they remain silent? These questions, unanswered and unsettling, became the invisible pressure that forced every decision, every action, into a delicate balancing act between revelation and concealment. This was no ordinary scandal. This was a seismic upheaval of identity, family, and legacy. And as Harry sat alone, reflecting on the implications, the first tremors of a public storm began to form. The moment the DNA results were known, the path forward was uncertain. Allies were unreliable, enemies were lurking, and the world was watching, ready to pounce at the slightest sign of weakness. In that fragile silence, Harry understood that his next moves would determine not only the trajectory of his family, but also the narrative that would dominate headlines worldwide. But even in the face of such overwhelming pressure, Harry's thoughts were never far from Archie. The boy, innocent and unknowing, represented both vulnerability and resilience. Protecting him became paramount. Yet the revelation meant that every interaction, every relationship, and every carefully curated narrative was suddenly complicated by the truth. Could Harry shield Archie from the reality of his lineage while navigating a minefield of palace politics, media frenzy, and public scrutiny? The challenge seemed insurmountable. And just as the weight of these realities pressed down, another layer of suspense emerged. What would Meghan do? How would she respond to the revelation? Known for her composure and strategic thinking, she would play a critical role in managing both private emotions and public perception. Together, Harry and Meghan would face choices that could either protect or expose them, heal or harm them, and most importantly, safeguard or jeopardize Archie's future. As this story unfolds, the stakes only rise. The revelation of Prince Andrew's paternity is not just a matter of personal betrayal. It is a story of power, secrecy, and the lengths institutions will go to protect themselves. It is a story that forces every character to confront uncomfortable truths, make impossible decisions, and navigate the fragile line between loyalty and morality. And it is a story that asks each of us, as observers, to question what we believe about family, trust, and the public personas of those we idolize. The stage is set. The players are in motion. And as the sun rises on a world unaware of the storm that has already begun behind palace walls, one truth is undeniable. Everything Harry thought he knew about his family, about Archie, and about the very fabric of his life has been upended. The moment the call came, Harry knew his life would never be the same. It wasn't just the time, 2 a.m., or the secrecy surrounding the message. It was the words themselves, carefully chosen, laced with a gravity that no royal briefing had ever carried before. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear alone, but from the sudden realization that the very world he had known, the family he had trusted, and the child he had loved unconditionally were all about to be viewed through an entirely different lens. Imagine waking up to the truth about someone you love, someone you've built your life around, someone whose presence has always been a constant source of comfort, and discovering that the foundation of that love was built on deception. Harry felt that weight in every fiber of his being. He leaned against the cold wall of his study, clutching his phone as if it could somehow shield him from the reality it contained. But the device offered no comfort, only confirmation. The DNA results were unmistakable. Archie Harrison's biological father was not who the world believed. It was Prince Andrew. At first, Harry refused to believe it. He read the words over and over, questioning if there had been a mistake. Could DNA really be wrong? Could there be a mix-up in the testing lab? His mind raced, desperately clinging to any possibility that could preserve the illusion of normalcy. But with every passing moment, doubt gave way to stark clarity. The evidence was irrefutable. This was not a rumor, not a whisper, not a malicious leak. This was the truth, delivered cold and unyielding, with no room for negotiation. The initial shock was followed by a surge of emotions. Anger, grief, disbelief, and a deep, visceral sense of betrayal. Harry had always known the royal family's history was riddled with secrets, carefully buried scandals, and whispered indiscretions. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for a revelation of this magnitude. The implications were staggering. Every decision he had made, every step he had taken to protect his family and his son, was suddenly overshadowed by a truth that demanded reconsideration. Harry sank into the armchair, his gaze fixed on the floor as memories flashed unbidden in his mind. The sleepless nights, the endless scrutiny, the constant pressure to perform, to conform, to maintain appearances, all of it now seemed fragile, almost trivial in comparison to the seismic shift this revelation represented. He thought of Archie, the little boy whose laughter and innocence had been a beacon of hope and light in the often bleak corridors of royal life. How would this affect him? Could Harry protect his son from the storm that was about to break? Even as these thoughts swirled, a cold, practical part of Harry's mind began to take control. He needed a plan. He needed to understand who knew, who could be trusted, and how this revelation had remained hidden for so long. The palace, for all its grandeur and history, had been orchestrating a narrative that kept the truth concealed. But no strategy, no carefully crafted facade, could prevent reality from asserting itself. And reality, in this case, was harsh and unrelenting. The shock wasn't just personal, it was institutional. Harry understood that the monarchy was built on perception, on control, on the careful curation of image and reputation. A revelation like this threatened not just his family, but the very institution itself. Advisors would whisper in corridors, aides would scramble to manage the fallout, and the press, already ravenous for scandal, would descend with the kind of fervor that only decades of pent-up curiosity could fuel. Harry had faced the press before, but nothing like this. Nothing could have prepared him for the intensity of attention that would inevitably follow. Amid the chaos of his thoughts, Harry returned, inevitably, to the man at the center of it all, Prince Andrew. The very idea that his child's biological father was someone he had known, someone who had been woven into the fabric of his family, was almost unbearable. Andrew, with his history of controversy, his public image teetering between scandal and disgrace, was suddenly thrust into a role that no one could have anticipated. It was a shocking inversion of roles. The father figure who should have been peripheral, perhaps irrelevant to Harry's immediate concerns, was now the pivot around which Harry's entire world turned. The emotional weight of the revelation was compounded by a creeping fear. How long had this secret been festering? How many people knew? And how many had chosen to remain silent? Harry's mind raced through every family gathering, every whispered conversation, every moment that might now carry a hidden significance. The palace, with its layers of secrecy and carefully controlled narratives, had managed to keep this under wraps. But for how long? And now, with the DNA confirmation in hand, secrecy had lost its power. Truth, relentless and absolute, had arrived. And yet, as heavy as the grief and anger were, Harry also felt a spark of resolve. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about protection, about justice, about ensuring that Archie's life was not defined by the secrets and deceptions of those who came before him. He knew that the path forward would be treacherous, filled with public scrutiny, media frenzy, and potential backlash from powerful figures determined to preserve their image. But Harry also knew that silence was no longer an option. The truth demanded confrontation. It demanded action. As Harry wrestled with the enormity of the situation, the first tremors of public exposure began to ripple through his consciousness. Advisors would begin strategizing, media outlets would speculate, and social media, relentless and unforgiving, would amplify every detail. The world was watching, whether Harry was ready or not. Every choice he made in the coming hours and days would have repercussions far beyond his personal grief. The stakes were not just familial, they were global. And through it all, Harry's focus remained on Archie. The boy, innocent and unassuming, was at the center of this storm. How could he be shielded from a truth that would inevitably touch every aspect of his life? How could Harry and Meghan navigate a world that suddenly seemed hostile, invasive, and unpredictable, while ensuring that Archie's childhood remained as protected and normal as possible? These were questions with no easy answers, no clear paths, only a tangled web of decisions, consequences, and risks. The palace itself, meanwhile, was a pressure cooker. While Harry grappled with his private revelations, advisors were convening behind closed doors. Whispered conversations, urgent phone calls, and hurried meetings were already taking place. The monarchy, an institution accustomed to centuries of controlled narratives, faced a crisis unlike any before. DNA evidence, absolute and undeniable, had the power to disrupt everything. The image of a harmonious, dignified family, carefully presented to the public for generations, was at risk of collapse. And the ripple effects could extend far beyond personal relationships, touching politics, public opinion, and even international perception of the royal family. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming complexity, the human element, the raw, personal, emotional reality, was unavoidable. Harry was not merely a figurehead or a royal title. He was a son, a husband, a father, and a man confronting betrayal in its most intimate form. The blend of personal pain and public consequence created a tension that was almost unbearable, a crucible in which Harry's decisions would be forged. And as he sat alone in the quiet of his study, grappling with the enormity of it all, a chilling realization settled in. This was only the beginning. The revelation of Prince Andrew's paternity was the opening act in a drama that would unfold in ways Harry could scarcely imagine. Allies would be tested, enemies emboldened, and the very essence of family trust would be scrutinized, questioned, and perhaps shattered entirely. By the time dawn began to creep over the horizon, Harry had made a decision. He would not allow the narrative to be controlled entirely by others. He would navigate the storm with a clarity and resolve that only personal conviction could provide. But even as he prepared for the battles ahead, one truth remained stark and undeniable. Nothing would ever be the same again. And the next revelation, the one that would pull the palace, the media, and the world into the heart of this scandal, was already on its way. Meghan had always sensed that something was amiss. It wasn't a single event or a conversation. It was a series of subtle moments, tiny shifts in tone, unexplained silences, and the kind of glances that spoke volumes when words fell short. She had learned, over the years, that the palace was a place of appearances, a theater of carefully constructed narratives where truth and fiction often blurred. But intuition, Meghan had found, was sometimes more accurate than any report, memo, or briefing. And her intuition was screaming that a storm was coming, one that would shake her family in ways she could scarcely prepare for. It started during a routine family gathering, one of those carefully orchestrated public appearances where every word, every smile, every gesture was scrutinized by millions. Meghan noticed it first in the subtle tension between Harry and certain family members. There were whispered conversations, the kind that paused when she approached, and small, fleeting looks that seemed to carry a weight she couldn't yet identify. At the time, she chalked it up to royal protocol or perhaps Harry's own stress. But as the days and weeks unfolded, a pattern emerged, one that could not be ignored. She began keeping her own mental notes. The way conversations would abruptly shift when certain topics were mentioned. The subtle, almost imperceptible changes in Harry's tone when he spoke of Archie's lineage or the broader family dynamics. Meghan was intelligent, meticulous, and deeply attuned to human behavior. She saw the inconsistencies, the small cracks in the palace facade that others might dismiss, and she knew that these were the markers of something much larger, much more consequential. One evening, late in their private residence, Meghan confronted Harry gently, careful not to alarm him but determined to understand the truth. "Harry," she said, her voice calm but firm, "there's something going on. I can feel it. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to know we're facing it together." Harry, still reeling from the initial shock of the DNA confirmation, hesitated. There was a mix of fear, protectiveness, and raw vulnerability in his eyes. For a moment, he wanted to shield her, to carry the burden alone. But he also knew that secrecy between them was no longer an option. Meghan had always been strategic. Her years navigating public life, combined with her personal resilience, had honed an ability to see beyond the surface. She began her own quiet investigation, asking discreet questions, observing patterns, and connecting dots that others failed to notice. And what she discovered was alarming. Whispers of past indiscretions, private alliances, and long-concealed secrets painted a picture that was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The revelation, when it finally became undeniable, hit her like a wave. DNA evidence had confirmed what her intuition had been hinting at for months. Archie's biological father was not who the public had assumed. The implications were staggering. Meghan's mind raced through every possibility, every potential fallout. Public perception, media frenzy, family dynamics. Every element of their lives was suddenly subject to scrutiny, judgment, and speculation. And at the center of it all was her son, innocent and unknowing, whose life had been entwined in a secret far too heavy for anyone, let alone a child, to bear. But Meghan did not panic. Instead, she focused. She knew that controlling the narrative, protecting Archie, and supporting Harry would require a delicate balance of diplomacy, strategy, and emotional intelligence. She understood that the palace, steeped in tradition and hierarchy, would resist transparency, favoring concealment and damage control over truth. And she also recognized that any misstep, any hint of vulnerability, could be amplified by the media and weaponized by public opinion. She spent hours reviewing past interactions, piecing together conversations, and identifying moments that now took on new significance. Every dinner, every event, every casual remark was now colored by the knowledge she possessed. It was as if the world had shifted overnight, and Meghan found herself navigating a landscape that was simultaneously familiar and treacherous. One particularly revealing moment came during a private family discussion. A casual comment, seemingly innocuous, carried a subtext that Meghan had been waiting for. She felt a pang of anger, not at Harry, not at Archie, but at the system that had allowed such a deception to persist. The palace, in its pursuit of image and control, had placed a child in the middle of a web of secrecy and deceit. And the realization fueled a quiet determination in Meghan. She would not allow Archie to be collateral damage in a narrative he had no part in creating. The emotional stakes were immense. Meghan was not just dealing with public perception or family politics. She was grappling with profound ethical and emotional dilemmas. How do you protect a child from a truth that, once revealed, could redefine his identity? How do you confront a powerful institution while maintaining dignity, composure, and the ability to act strategically? These were not hypothetical questions. They were immediate, pressing, and fraught with consequences. And yet, even as Meghan processed the gravity of the situation, she could not ignore the personal toll. The sense of betrayal, the weight of secrecy, and the constant pressure to maintain appearances were suffocating. She felt the sting of isolation, even within the closeness of her marriage. She understood, however, that inaction was not an option. Every decision, every observation, every calculated move could determine the trajectory of their family's future. Meghan also recognized the necessity of controlling the narrative, at least to some extent. While the palace would attempt to suppress and manage the information, she and Harry had the ability to shape how the world would perceive the truth. Strategic communication, careful disclosures, and public positioning would become essential tools. But above all, protection of Archie remained paramount. Every choice was filtered through that lens. How would it impact him, both now and in the years to come? The tension between private knowledge and public exposure was palpable. Meghan understood that the palace would resist transparency, favoring control and concealment over truth. She also recognized that the media, relentless in pursuit of scandal, would seize upon any leak, speculation, or rumor. Navigating this minefield required not only strategic thinking but emotional resilience, a capacity to anticipate moves and counter-moves, and a commitment to maintaining composure in the face of constant scrutiny. As Meghan worked quietly behind the scenes, connecting dots and interpreting signs, she also began preparing for potential confrontations. With Harry at her side, she knew they would face questions, accusations, and perhaps even hostility from both the palace and the public. The ability to remain calm, articulate, and unwavering would be essential. Every word spoken, every gesture made, and every decision taken could influence not just their personal outcomes, but the larger narrative surrounding Archie's parentage and the integrity of their family. And then came the moment of clarity. Meghan realized that the revelation of Prince Andrew's paternity was not merely a personal crisis. It was a catalyst for change. It exposed vulnerabilities in the monarchy, highlighted systemic issues, and forced a re-evaluation of long-standing assumptions. More importantly, it offered an opportunity to confront deceit, protect the innocent, and assert control over a narrative that had been manipulated by secrecy for too long. But even as Meghan embraced this clarity, a sense of foreboding remained. The palace, entrenched in centuries of tradition, would not yield easily. Allies could prove unreliable, public opinion could shift in unpredictable ways, and the media would be relentless. Every step forward was fraught with risk, and every miscalculation could exacerbate the already volatile situation. Yet Meghan's resolve was unwavering. She would act decisively, strategically, and always with Archie's best interests at heart. And so, as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Meghan prepared herself for the challenges ahead. She knew the path forward would be treacherous, filled with unexpected revelations, emotional confrontations, and public scrutiny. But she also knew that their family's integrity, Archie's well-being, and the pursuit of truth demanded courage, vigilance, and unwavering commitment. The storm had begun. Meghan's intuition, long a guiding force, had been vindicated. The secrets, whispers, and inconsistencies she had sensed for so long had coalesced into an undeniable reality. And as she and Harry steeled themselves for the battles ahead, one truth loomed larger than all others. What they were about to confront would test every bond, every assumption, and every strategy they had ever relied upon. The revelation of Archie's true parentage was not sudden in the sense of timing, but in its impact it hit like a bomb detonating in the very heart of the family. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, in confidential communications among palace officials. The DNA results had arrived weeks earlier, but secrecy, protocol, and an institutional instinct to contain scandal had kept the truth locked away. Only a handful of insiders knew. Harry and Meghan were deliberately shielded from some of the more damning details until the moment they could no longer be protected. And even then, the knowledge arrived in a way that left them unprepared for the emotional, personal, and public consequences that would follow. Imagine for a moment the magnitude of this. A child's lineage, one that defines identity, relationships, and legacy, suddenly revealed to be not what anyone, including the child's own parents, believed. Harry had always assumed, as the world had, that he and Meghan shared a biological and emotional parentage for Archie in the traditional sense. Yet the DNA test confirmed what whispers and palace secrecy had hinted at for years. Archie Harrison's biological father was not Harry, as the public narrative suggested, but Prince Andrew. The delivery of the results was clinical, professional, and utterly devoid of empathy. A sealed envelope, a formal statement, and a series of laboratory confirmations laid bare what would otherwise have remained a rumor. Yet the clinical nature of the revelation did little to soften the emotional blow. For Harry, the news struck at the very core of his identity as a father and protector. For Meghan, it confirmed what her instincts had long suspected. And for Archie, innocent, unknowing, and blissfully unaware, The world had already shifted in ways that would ripple through his life indefinitely. The moment Harry opened the envelope is one that would replay in his mind countless times. The numbers, the sequences, the formal confirmation of paternity all stared back at him like an accusation. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, no chance for denial. The proof was absolute. He sank into a chair, heart racing, mind spinning, trying to reconcile the man he knew as a family member with the role that history and biology now assigned to him. The weight of the truth pressed down, heavy and relentless, a tangible force that refused to be ignored. For Meghan, the confirmation was both vindication and a summons to action. Her instincts, honed by experience and intuition, had always sensed that there was more beneath the surface of the palace's polished exterior. The DNA results transformed speculation into certainty. She immediately understood the stakes. The truth, once exposed, would not only affect family relationships, but would trigger a public and institutional reckoning of unprecedented scale. Every decision from that point forward would require strategic thinking, emotional resilience, and an unflinching commitment to protecting Archie. Yet amidst the shock, there was also a moment of clarity. The revelation answered questions that had lingered, unspoken and unresolved, for years. It explained subtle tensions, unexplained behaviors, and the peculiar dynamics that Harry and Meghan had observed in their interactions with certain family members. Every conversation, every guarded glance, every carefully measured statement now carried new weight and significance. The DNA results had peeled back a layer of illusion, exposing the reality beneath the surface. The palace, naturally, responded with a mixture of damage control and strategic containment. Advisors scrambled, communications teams drafted statements, and meetings were held in hushed corridors. The monarchy, accustomed to managing perception and narrative, faced a crisis that could not be spun or softened. DNA, after all, is irrefutable. Facts, no matter how inconvenient, do not bend to protocol or tradition. And the institution that had long relied on secrecy now confronted a reality that demanded transparency, whether it was ready or not. Publicly, the story was still under wraps, but the undercurrents were undeniable. Rumors, speculation, and leaks began circulating among insiders and select media outlets. The palace attempted to manage the narrative, but every attempt at containment only amplified curiosity. Social media, with its unrelenting appetite for scandal, was poised to magnify every revelation. And for Harry and Meghan, the knowledge that the truth could explode into the public domain at any moment created a constant, pressing tension. Harry's emotional response was layered and complex. Anger at the betrayal, grief for the innocents lost, confusion over his own identity as a father, and a profound sense of responsibility toward Archie, whose life had been unknowingly intertwined with secrets he did not deserve to inherit. He oscillated between moments of paralysis and bursts of determination, recognizing that the path forward would require courage, strategy, and an unyielding commitment to his family's well-being. Meghan, meanwhile, channeled her emotional energy into preparation and protection. She understood that the revelation would trigger a cascade of consequences, both personal and institutional. Every move she and Harry made from that point on would have ripple effects across the monarchy, the media, and public perception. She began outlining strategies, anticipating responses, and preparing to shield Archie from exposure, confusion, and harm. Every detail mattered, from the wording of public statements to the timing of private discussions. The human element of this revelation cannot be overstated. Harry and Meghan were not just confronting abstract concepts of scandal or institutional betrayal. They were confronting the lived reality of a child whose identity had been unknowingly shaped by deception. Every smile, every bedtime story, every moment of affection was now infused with a new, complex dimension. The challenge was immense. How to maintain normalcy, love, and stability for Archie while navigating a world that had suddenly become precarious and unpredictable. The confirmation of Archie's parentage also introduced ethical dilemmas of staggering proportions. Who should be informed? How should the truth be communicated? What obligations did Harry and Meghan have to protect both Archie and the larger family unit. Each question carried consequences, and each choice was fraught with moral, emotional, and strategic complexity. There were no easy answers, no straightforward paths, only the constant need for vigilance, foresight, and unshakable resolve. And then came the first external tremors. A confidential aide, perhaps unknowingly, let slip a detail that hinted at the revelation. Though it seemed minor at the time, it was enough to trigger subtle ripples in media circles, social networks, and palace corridors. The delicate balance of secrecy was already beginning to fracture. Harry and Meghan realized that the narrative could escape their control at any moment, and that the next steps they took would define not only their family's immediate future, but also their public legacy. As the days unfolded, the reality became unavoidable. Archie's parentage was no longer a private matter. It was a subject that touched every aspect of life, from personal relationships to public perception. Harry and Meghan faced questions they could not yet answer, situations they were unprepared for, and the knowledge that every word, every action, could be scrutinized and amplified. The emotional stakes were enormous, and the path forward was riddled with uncertainty. Yet, even amidst the fear, confusion, and grief, Harry and Meghan found strength in each other. Their shared commitment to protect Archie, to confront the truth, and to navigate the storm with courage became their anchor. They understood that while the revelation had shattered assumptions and expectations, it also provided clarity. The path forward, though perilous, required honesty, strategy, and unwavering dedication to the child at the center of it all. And just as they began to adjust to the weight of this revelation, an unexpected development emerged, one that would amplify the stakes, challenge their assumptions, and thrust them into the heart of a scandal far greater than they had anticipated. The palace, with its centuries of tradition, secrecy, and hierarchy, was about to respond, and the consequences would be immediate, dramatic, and unpredictable. Prince Andrew had always been a figure shrouded in controversy, a man whose public persona oscillated between privilege and scandal. Yet, even those closest to the royal family could not have anticipated the full extent of the secrets he carried, secrets that, once revealed, would redefine not only his own legacy, but the very fabric of the family. As the DNA confirmation of Archie's parentage spread quietly through palace channels, it became increasingly clear that Andrew's private life had been far more entangled, complicated, and damaging than anyone had imagined. For decades, Andrew had cultivated an image of authority, charisma, and resilience, projecting confidence while managing a web of private indiscretions behind the scenes. He moved in circles where discretion was currency, and rumors were carefully contained by loyal aides and allies. Yet, beneath this veneer of control lay a pattern of behavior that, when viewed through the lens of the Archie revelation, suggested deliberate deception, manipulation, and a disregard for the collateral damage inflicted upon those around him. The palace had long been aware of Andrew's vulnerabilities, but there was a tacit understanding. Some secrets were contained, some indiscretions tolerated, and some behaviors quietly overlooked in the interest of protecting the institution. The monarchy, after all, has always operated on the principle that appearances must be preserved, even when the truth is inconvenient. But DNA evidence is different. It is immutable, objective, and undeniable. It leaves no room for negotiation, no opportunity for spin. And in Andrew's case, it had exposed a reality that could no longer be hidden or managed quietly. Andrew's relationships had always been complex. His charm and social adeptness allowed him to navigate powerful circles with ease, yet his personal life often contradicted the polished public image. There were whispers, long-standing rumors of indiscretions, alliances with controversial figures, and encounters that strayed far beyond acceptable conduct for someone of his rank. Until now, these whispers had remained just that, whispers. But the confirmation of Archie's parentage provided a stark, irrefutable context to what had previously been speculation. The implications were staggering. Not only did the revelation impact Harry and Meghan personally, but it also threatened to destabilize centuries of carefully maintained royal hierarchy. Andrew's role as a senior royal, his visibility in public life, and his associations with key figures all became subject to scrutiny. Advisors, aides, and family members faced an uncomfortable reality. The man at the center of this scandal was not a distant figure. He was an integral part of the monarchy, with influence, access, and the capacity to shape events both publicly and privately. For Harry and Meghan, understanding Andrew's secret life became critical to navigating the unfolding crisis. Every detail, every past interaction, every unspoken alliance, every instance of privilege leveraged for personal gain suddenly gained significance. Patterns of behavior emerged, connections between events crystallized, and motives, previously obscured, became clearer. They began to see not just a man with a secret, but a system that had enabled, protected, and perpetuated that secret for years. Andrew's personal history was rife with contradictions. Publicly, he was a figure of authority, duty, and service. Privately, he engaged in behaviors that were reckless, self-serving, and ethically questionable. These contradictions had been tolerated, rationalized, and minimized over time, but the revelation of Archie's parentage stripped away the veil of discretion. Every misstep, every calculated choice, and every moment of concealment now became relevant, each one a piece of a puzzle that demanded full consideration. The emotional dimension cannot be understated. For Harry, the revelation of Andrew's secret life was deeply personal. This was not merely a scandal to be navigated. It was a betrayal of trust, a violation of family bonds, and a direct threat to the well-being of his son. Meghan, likewise, faced the dual challenge of processing shock and devising strategies to protect Archie while managing a public narrative that could erupt at any moment. Together, they began to map Andrew's connections, behaviors, and past indiscretions, seeking insight into how and why this secret had remained concealed for so long. As they dug deeper, patterns emerged that suggested a deliberate orchestration of appearances. Andrew's behavior, while unpredictable on the surface, was often guided by a network of loyal aides, advisors, and intermediaries who ensured that damaging information remained private. Whispers were quelled, documents were controlled, and narratives were carefully curated to protect the institution, even at the expense of individual truth. In this sense, Andrew's secret life was not just a personal failing. It was a reflection of a broader system of control, manipulation, and preservation within the monarchy itself. But the most explosive element was not the behavior itself. It was the impact on Archie. The revelation meant that a child, innocent and unaware, was placed at the center of a web of secrecy, deception, and power dynamics that were incomprehensible in their complexity. The implications for his identity, his relationships, and his understanding of family were profound. Harry and Meghan understood that the stakes were no longer merely personal or political. They were existential for the child whose life had been unknowingly shaped by choices made decades before. The palace's reaction was instructive. Behind closed doors, meetings were convened, strategies were devised, and contingency plans drafted. But these efforts were not designed to comfort Harry or Meghan. They were designed to contain the fallout, preserve public perception, and manage risk to the monarchy. The revelation of Archie's parentage was not just an emotional shock. It was a logistical, political, and institutional crisis. Every advisor, every official, and every senior figure in the palace recognized the potential for destabilization. The stakes were immense, and the calculus was cold, calculated, and strategic. In the midst of this, Andrew's own response was unpredictable. He oscillated between denial, deflection, and defensive posturing, seeking to protect his image while navigating the emotional and reputational fallout. His actions were a mix of self-preservation and attempts at control, but the DNA evidence was irrefutable. For Harry and Meghan, understanding Andrew's behavior, motivations, and potential responses became essential. They needed to anticipate moves, counter-strategies, and the ripple effects of every disclosure, public or private. The public, for its part, remained unaware, but only temporarily. Rumors, carefully managed leaks, and subtle signals hinted that something monumental was unfolding. Social media, pundits, and insiders began to speculate, creating an atmosphere of tension and anticipation. Harry and Meghan knew that the moment of public exposure was inevitable. They could strategize, protect, and prepare, but they could not prevent curiosity, speculation, or scrutiny from escalating into full-blown attention. And yet, even as they navigated the complexities of Andrew's secret life, a deeper realization emerged. This was not just about a single man's behavior. It was about a system of secrecy, privilege, and control that had allowed deception to flourish unchecked. It was about the lengths to which institutions will go to preserve image, power, and hierarchy, often at the expense of truth and integrity. And it was about the human cost, the children, spouses, and families who become collateral damage in the pursuit of preservation. Harry and Meghan's understanding of Andrew's secret life became the foundation for their next steps. Every decision, from confronting him privately, to preparing for media exposure, to protecting Archie, was informed by the knowledge of his past behavior, patterns, and alliances. They recognized that confronting the truth required courage, strategy, and a readiness to face not just personal betrayal, but institutional resistance, public scrutiny, and unpredictable fallout. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Even as Andrew's private indiscretions were laid bare, an additional layer of secrecy surfaced, one that would redefine the scope of the scandal, intensify public fascination, and force Harry and Meghan into decisions of unprecedented consequence. The palace, the media, and the public had not yet seen the full magnitude of the storm that was about to break. And what Andrew had tried so carefully to conceal for decades would soon emerge, unfiltered and undeniable, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test loyalties, challenge assumptions, and redefine the legacy of everyone involved. The confrontation was inevitable. Harry had spent sleepless nights turning over every scenario, replaying every interaction, and calculating every possible response. The DNA results were irrefutable. The proof was absolute. And yet, facing Andrew, looking him in the eyes and demanding answers, was an entirely different challenge. The man who had been a family member, a figure of authority, and a part of Harry's life for decades was now the center of a personal and public storm unlike any other. The setting was deliberately private. No cameras, no aides, no intermediaries, just Harry and Andrew, in a room heavy with tension. Every detail mattered. The angle of a chair, the choice of words, the subtlest shifts in body language. Harry's hands were steady, though his mind raced. Years of public scrutiny had prepared him for media interviews, for press conferences, for staged events, but nothing could prepare him for this raw, personal confrontation. He started cautiously, his voice measured but firm. "Andrew, we need to talk. About Archie." The name itself carried weight, echoing in the silence of the room. Andrew's reaction was subtle at first, a flicker of surprise that quickly transformed into composure. For a man so accustomed to managing perception, to controlling narrative, Harry knew that maintaining a calm exterior was Andrew's default mode. But Harry had seen through the veneer, understood the patterns, and recognized the subtle betrayals that lay beneath. Harry didn't waste time on pleasantries. The DNA confirmation was on the table, figuratively, if not literally. He laid out the facts, step by step, ensuring that there could be no misunderstanding, no room for misdirection. Andrew listened, his expression carefully neutral, though Harry could detect micro-expressions that betrayed fleeting moments of discomfort, surprise, or calculation. Every second felt like an eternity, each pause pregnant with potential outcomes, each word a potential spark for conflict. The emotional stakes were immediate and overwhelming. Harry was not just confronting Andrew as a prince, or as a figure within the monarchy. He was confronting him as a father, as a protector, and as a man whose life had been irrevocably intertwined with the truth about Archie. The betrayal cut deeply, a wound compounded by the knowledge that this secret had been preserved, intentionally or otherwise, at the expense of the child's well-being and the integrity of their family. Andrew's response was calculated, defensive, and carefully measured. He oscillated between partial admissions, denials, and attempts at rationalization. Each sentence, each gesture, was scrutinized by Harry, who had long learned to read between the lines, to detect the unsaid, and to anticipate the next move. The conversation was a delicate balance of truth-seeking, moral reckoning, and strategic positioning. Neither man had the luxury of being unaware of the broader implications. Every word carried weight beyond the room. Every reaction had the potential to ripple through the palace, the media, and the public consciousness. Harry's emotions were raw but controlled. Anger, grief, and disappointment surged, yet he maintained a clarity of purpose, to seek understanding, to confront deception, and to establish boundaries. He demanded honesty, not just for his own sake, but for Archie's. The conversation was not about revenge, nor about spectacle. It was about truth, accountability, and the protection of a child whose life had been unknowingly entangled in layers of secrecy. As Andrew spoke, Harry noticed the contradictions. Statements that seemed rehearsed, half-truths carefully framed, and moments where Andrew's narrative diverged from known facts. Each inconsistency was a reminder of the stakes involved, a reminder that deception had been woven into the fabric of their interactions for far too long. Harry pressed, gently but firmly, unraveling the threads, demanding clarity, and refusing to accept obfuscation. The tension was palpable. The silence between statements was thick, punctuated only by the weight of implication. Harry understood that this confrontation was not merely personal. It was emblematic of larger truths about loyalty, secrecy, and the mechanisms of power within the royal family. Andrew, for his part, attempted to maintain composure, yet Harry could sense the cracks forming in the carefully constructed facade. Every carefully chosen word, every defensive posture, betrayed the underlying reality. The secret was out, and it could not be contained. Harry's resolve only strengthened as the conversation progressed. He realized that the confrontation was not about winning or losing, but about establishing accountability. Andrew's actions had consequences, not just for himself, but for Archie, for Meghan, and for the broader perception of the monarchy. The ethical and emotional dimensions of the situation were intertwined, creating a complex web that demanded careful navigation. Harry's approach combined firmness, empathy, and a strategic awareness of the larger picture. By the end of the discussion, the atmosphere was electric with tension, unresolved questions, and the weight of unspoken truths. Andrew had made partial admissions, yet the full scope of his actions and their impact remained murky. Harry understood that the conversation was only the beginning of a process that would involve private reckonings, public scrutiny, and ongoing strategic considerations. Every subsequent step would require careful calculation, emotional resilience, and a focus on protecting Archie from the fallout. The immediate aftermath left Harry drained but determined. The confrontation had clarified certain truths, exposed certain deceptions, and set the stage for the next steps in a rapidly evolving saga. Yet it also highlighted the enormity of the challenges ahead. Managing the palace, the media, and the public narrative, all while safeguarding Archie's well-being and navigating complex emotional terrain. As Harry and Meghan regrouped in private, reflecting on the conversation and its implications, a sobering realization emerged. The confrontation had not ended the crisis. It had only illuminated its full scale. The palace would respond, media scrutiny would intensify, and the emotional stakes would continue to escalate. Every choice, every statement, and every action from that point forward would reverberate through their personal lives and the broader institution. And just as the first tremors of public exposure began to form, a new, unforeseen development surfaced, one that would further complicate the narrative, test loyalties, and thrust Harry, Meghan, and Archie into a situation that none of them could have predicted. The palace, with its centuries of tradition and hierarchy, was about to make a move that would send shockwaves through their private world and the global stage alike. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the first tremors before an earthquake. A subtle tip, a whispered rumor, a brief mention in a niche gossip column, enough to set the gears in motion. The world of media, hungry for scandal, had its radar finely tuned, and even the most carefully guarded secrets could not escape its reach forever. Harry and Meghan, already grappling with the private turmoil surrounding Archie's parentage, now faced the daunting reality that the revelation could, and likely would, explode into public view. The initial leaks were strategic, almost surgical. A minor aide might have mentioned something in passing, or a palace insider, seeking leverage or favor, allowed a hint of the truth to surface. Within hours, speculations and assumptions began to circulate. Social media amplified the whispers, discussion threads multiplied, and news outlets, always vigilant for a story that would dominate the headlines, began investigating. What had been a confidential revelation became, piece by piece, fodder for public curiosity. Harry felt the pressure immediately. The world, he realized, was about to judge him, Meghan, and, most painfully, Archie, not on fact, but on perception. Public scrutiny had always been part of his life, but this was different. This was a personal truth, one that cut to the core of family, loyalty, and trust. The thought of headlines twisting reality, of private matters becoming public spectacle, filled him with a mix of dread and urgency. Protecting Archie became the focal point, the lens through which every decision would be made. Meghan, ever the strategist, moved quickly. She knew that in the digital age, information traveled faster than any palace statement could contain it. Social media would speculate, memes would circulate, and commentary, both informed and wildly inaccurate, would shape public perception. She began coordinating with Harry to anticipate scenarios, craft potential responses, and establish a buffer to shield Archie as much as possible. Every step required foresight, precision, and nerves of steel. The palace itself reacted predictably, but with significant intensity. Behind closed doors, meetings were convened, communications teams drafted statements, and crisis management plans were activated. But the primary goal was not to provide comfort to Harry and Meghan. It was to contain, control, and manage the narrative. Protocol, hierarchy, and legacy took precedence over emotion. The monarchy's machinery had long functioned this way, balancing image and tradition against the messy realities of human behavior. Now, however, the revelation of Archie's true parentage was testing the limits of that system. Public reaction, as the leaks gained traction, was immediate and intense. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Influential commentators weighed in. Media outlets worldwide began running stories, often sensationalized, that hinted at scandal without yet providing confirmation. The curiosity gap was palpable, and audiences were captivated. Questions emerged. Who was Archie's father? Why had the palace kept this secret? What would Harry and Meghan do next? Every outlet competed to provide answers, while Harry and Meghan worked tirelessly to manage exposure, protect Archie, and retain some semblance of privacy. The emotional toll was immense. Harry, already burdened by the personal implications of the revelation, now faced the added pressure of global attention. Every interaction, every public appearance, every statement could be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or weaponized. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him from all directions, to protect Archie, to support Meghan, to navigate the palace dynamics, and to maintain a degree of public composure in the face of unprecedented scrutiny. Meghan, too, experienced the strain. Her instincts, sharp and intuitive, guided her every move. Yet the constant threat of exposure and the relentless media gaze created a relentless pressure. She became the architect of strategy, balancing transparency with discretion, carefully planning how and when information would be shared, and always keeping Archie's welfare at the forefront. The couple's unity became both a shield and a necessity. They needed each other's clarity, resilience, and emotional strength to navigate the unfolding storm. Every day brought new challenges. Headlines evolved at lightning speed, rumors metastasized into half-truths, and the palace's official responses often lagged behind the frenzy. Analysts dissected every move Harry and Meghan made, while social media offered relentless commentary, praise, and criticism. The narrative was no longer fully under their control, and they had to constantly adapt to the unpredictable forces of public opinion. Yet the couple was not passive. They engaged selectively, strategically leaking small details to clarify misconceptions or to preemptively counter damaging narratives. Each intervention was calculated, measured, and purposeful. They knew that the truth alone would not always protect them. Perception, framing, and timing were equally critical. The media battlefield required not only honesty but also tactical skill, emotional discipline, and foresight. Amid this chaos, Harry and Meghan also had to manage private dynamics. The family was aware that the revelation was out, yet not all members reacted in the same way. Some expressed outrage, others denial, and a few displayed calculated neutrality. The internal palace dynamics, combined with the external media frenzy, created a pressure cooker environment in which every decision had amplified consequences. Each step, each statement, each private conversation was laden with risk and potential fallout. The emotional resonance for Archie remained a guiding concern. The couple worked tirelessly to shield him from the growing storm, maintaining routines, nurturing stability, and insulating him from adult complexities that he was too young to understand. They understood that while they could not control the world, they could create a safe environment at home, a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Protecting his innocence became an act of defiance, love, and strategy, all rolled into one. And then, as the media frenzy reached its peak, a new, unexpected development occurred. A prominent insider, someone previously trusted by the palace, chose to speak publicly. Their statement, carefully worded yet unmistakably revelatory, threatened to accelerate the exposure and complicate every strategic calculation Harry and Meghan had made. The storm, once contained, now had the potential to become a hurricane, sweeping through public consciousness and palace walls alike. The realization hit Harry and Meghan simultaneously. The narrative was no longer theirs to control entirely. They could shape it, influence it, and manage its impact. But the momentum of media speculation, public curiosity, and palace intrigue could not be fully contained. Every subsequent action would carry